All right, you ready? Louisville family law, wake up. Consultation, get a free one, but your constitution. Killing Holly pirates, torture, the worst punishment in the history of mankind. You don't say with the all-seeing eye up on your ship. Y'all better wake up. It's the legal thing. Let's see what they say. Not the eye and the eye over in the corner. Huh. Nice.
In the ancient world and the Middle Ages, the ship represented the pinnacle of the military. The ship was a sacred thing.
And you don't say. Not the military. And the pinnacle of the ship. Let's walk on in, my friend. You've been lost in dead sea. Let me pick the...
As time went by, it was those who ruled the waves that became the most powerful nations. But during the Age of Discovery, when ships were...
The Age of Discovery? Not the Carouse.
Discovering new worlds and crossing vast oceans, life was tough for sailors. The Age of Discovery was also an era of mutiny, when an aggrieved crew...
Mutiny. Mutations. It don't say. What, like an X-Men? Number 10? What?
And crossing vast oceans. A sacred thing, and as time went by, it was those who ruled the waves that became the most powerful nations. But during the
Ride that wave, baby.
Age of Discovery, when ships were discovering new worlds and crossing vast oceans, life was tough for sailors. The Age of Discovery was also an era of mutiny, when an aggrieved crew turned against their captain. All hell could break loose, and there was nowhere to hide. That's why some particularly horrifying...
Bingo. Did you catch all that? Lost at sea. Y'all better wake up and realize you're on a boat. And you're like, hey, Captain, the fuck is going on? They ain't got nowhere to go.
Punishments were reserved for out-of-control sailors. Welcome to keel hauling. Our viewers have likely seen the movies that depict mutinies on ships or sailors that no longer follow commands. For their
don't follow that command, you die. Because you've been lost at sea, man. You already did. But rise up. Look what they did to these people when they rose up. Let's find out.
The punishment had to be quite severe, because when you're in the middle of the ocean, you just can't afford to let things slide. On the other hand, if a captain is too stern, this might create a conspiracy to take him out, and that's what we call mutiny.
The conspiracy. On the what? The bounty.
Maybe the most well-known of those was the mutiny on the Bounty. A captain had to be hard but fair, lest he lose the respect of his crew. The most common types of punishment then were not keel hauling, which could be said to be the most severe form. It was most likely that the offending sailor would receive some strokes of the cane, or worse, the whip. He might simply be tied to the mast and left to think about what he'd done. But let's say a sailor had been part of a mutiny, and that mutiny had failed. Or what if the villains of the seas, the pirates, had wanted to come down hard on someone? What was the worst thing they could do? Well, they might be hanged, but it was a particularly painful type of hanging, because rather than being dropped, the person would be pulled up while his head was on the noose. He would be run up something called the yardam, which was part of the timber cross-section of the mast from where the sails are set. There was a case of hanging by the yardam in 1860 that happened to the Royal Marine John Dallinger on the HMS Levin. There was also...
The master's been walking the yard dead sleep, lost his seat. Wake up.
Cases where men were thrown overboard, but in one infamous instance of this happening, the men hadn't committed a...
Bingo, because I'm innocent. I am the one. Wake up.
Crime. The crime was against them. It's now known as the Zong Massacre, and 130 slaves were thrown overboard a British ship. And then there's the punishment you might have all heard of from reading books or watching movies about pirates, and that's the ghastly...
Not the what did he say? Not the how many was it?
Happening, the men hadn't committed a crime. The crime was against them. It's now known as the Zong Massacre, and 130 slaves were thrown overboard a British ship.
The Zone 130. There go your 13 for this rebirth, baby.
And then there's the punishment you might have all heard of from reading books or watching movies about pirates. And that's the ghastly treatment that involved having a man to walk the plank and into the ocean. Despite this being the most recognizable punishment in the era of pirates, it's mostly a thing of fiction. There have been some recorded instances, such as a mutineer in the 18th century confessing that he had made his officers walk the plank while blindfolded, but the details are sketchy on this, and many believe that it never happened. There are some instances that sound true, and were
catch them in reading the newspaper. Walking blind, man. Telling y'all stories. Did you catch it?
reported in the newspapers of the day, but walking the plank was certainly a rare thing to happen. So now we come to keel hauling, which definitely did happen and you might argue was a worse punishment than any of the above. The keel of the ship is like the backbone of the ship. It's the bottom part. When someone is hauled under the keel, this is called keel hauling. That person might have been hauled with ropes from one side of the ship to the other, or even worse, dragged the entire length of the ship from what are called the bow and the stern. As you can imagine, this would be
Your bow and your stern, right, boy?
rather unpleasant, to say the least. You might think, well, if the operation was short enough,
Back to work, you scallywag.
at least you could hold your breath and make it to the other side. You might then dry yourself off, issue some apologies, and be back to work. That wasn't really the case, though, because being bashed up against the ship was a painful affair. There was a good chance bones would be broken or a head injury could.
Not the X's mark the spot. 2020, can you see? The 10 is the X's, but I am the one.
Mean the person was pulled up dead. It was actually quite an extreme form of punishment because the ships are generally
Not the one.
not smooth on the surface of the hull, the part of the ship that floats in the water.
Don't cry.
These wooden ships' hulls were covered in barnacles, which are those ultra-sharp crustaceans that stick to things. We are sure some of you have experienced slipping on a rock and being cut by these razor-sharp things. Now imagine your body being hauled against them with pressure. The keel-hauled man would be shredded.
No pressure. Just Freddy Krueger. Y'all are asleep. Nice job, fellas.
All over his body, and he might come out looking like a victim of Freddy Krueger. It was a fate worse than marooning, which is when pirates just left people to die on a deserted island. Jokingly, some pirates called this making someone the governor of an island. Back to
The governor of the island, because you the only one.
keel hauling. Sometimes weight was placed on the man so the people pulling him had more control of the movement of his body. There was an upside and a downside to this. He might have actually missed all those sharp barnacles if he went low enough, but he might also have drowned. This punishment was rare, to say the least, but there have been depictions of it in paintings going back to ancient times and the Middle Ages. There is this picture that was sketched sometime in the 15th or 16th century England. It was discussed in 1880 in British Parliament when one politician asked the Secretary to Admiralty about an instance of keel hauling that had been reported in Italian newspapers. It allegedly happened on the HMS Alexandra, but the Navy denied it had ever happened. There is also a well-known painting that's called The Keel Hauling of the Ship's Surgeon of Admiral
The Navy denied it. And the British.
Jan van Ness. The event happened on a stationary ship in front of many spectators, but it seems the punishment was never supposed to kill the offender, but only act as a warning to others who thought about not towing the line. Pun intended.
Pun intended. Let this be a warning to all.
That expression is a reference from the Navy. Historians have written that keel hauling did happen in the Dutch Navy. They described as we have, saying that the man was lowered on pulleys and ropes into the water and weights were attached to him. He was then pulled back up the other side of the ship, although it's also written that he...
Oh, let's rewind it so you can watch that, the little wheel the guy's rolling up on. It's a cross. And he's bringing it to the what? The X. The 10. We've removed that because I am the one.
They described described as we have, saying that the man was lowered on pulleys and ropes into the water and weights were attached to him. He was then pulled back up the other side of the ship, although it's also written that he might have been given some time to get his breath back, and then it started again. This was apparent.
I got my breath. Can you see the X? Marks that spot, baby. Because I am the one.
Much more severe in the winter when the water was freezing cold, and severe injury could happen due to the man hitting his head. It wasn't supposed to be a death sentence, though. In the case of this keel hauling, it was under the command of a 17th century Dutch admiral named Jan Jan, although it's also written that he might have been given some time to get his breath back, and then it started again. This was apparently much more severe in the winter when the water was freezing cold, and severe injury.
But too bad. Y'all had to die and get tortured for a little while.
Could happen due to the man hitting his head. It wasn't supposed to be a death sentence, though. In the case of this keel hauling, it was under the command of a 17th
But I am the one.
century Dutch admiral named Jan Janse van Ness. We just can't find any resource that tells
Y'all, cause y'all just been finessed.
us what the guilty surgeon had done to deserve this wicked treatment. Keel hauling is described in a book called A Relation of Two Several Voyages Made into the East Indies that was published
Not in the East, where I've been known to reside.
1700. Again, it's the Dutch that did it. Here's an excerpt from that book. He that strikes an officer or master of the ship is without hopes of pardon to be thrown into the sea, fastened by a rope, with which he is thrown in on one side of the ship, and drawn up again on the other. And so 3 times together he is drawn round the keel of the ship, in the doing of which, if
Not the 3 times.
they should chance not to allow rope enough to let him sink below the keel, the malefactor might have his brains knocked out. It sounds like
Not your brain knocked out, but a wicked serpent that threw you on the ship. Can you see now? 2020, there's your 2 X's. Y'all can't see the 10? The 2 10s make 2020, baby. You know what 10 is? 10 is that wicked, evil spirit that creep among us. And it could have your brains knocked out. The devil is after the minds of men, my friends. Y'all better wake up.
the lower the man sank, the better his chances were of keeping his head intact and not being sliced by barnacles. There are other cases of keel hauling that were described in the journal of Dutch admiral named Martin Harpenschroen Tromp. In 1639, he described something similar to the above. In the 18th century, a piece of writing by an Englishman said, "The English don't do it, but the French do." One instance is described when a French sailor
And onward we go.
went around the ship 5 times. It was published in November of 1869 in a publication called Onward Magazine. The person who witnessed this and wrote about it said the sailor had injuries of the most serious nature, or death itself, certain of being the result. Alright matey, now that you've gotten through this video, let's stick together and watch another.
Wake up. Cause how? How not to forget. How not to forget. Y'all been asleep, man. And we all forgot.